Test 1, 2.
Test 1, 2. Test 1, 2. Test 1, 2. Kako se čuje?
Obviously, I need them. This one is the one. This one is the one that you open.
Dame i gospodo, dragi prijatelji, you see, the last detail have to be done in the very last moment, for sure. Dame i gospodo, dragi prijatelji, moje uvažene koleginice i kolege, ljudi koji ste dali jedan dan praznika za otvorenu nauku. Meni je izuzetno zadovoljstvo i čast da vas kao upravnik ove biblioteke i profesor na Filološkom fakultetu pozdravim. Meni je milo da smo mogli da se okupimo i više sam nego srećan da je jedna grupa izuzetnih stručnjaka i evropskih lidera u jednom veoma važnom procesu za nas mogla danas da dođe i da nam se pridruži. Od vas očekujemo samo jedno, da im pružimo zajedno priliku da osete koliko je nama važno da budemo deo razumne i otvorene svetske zajednice naučnika, istraživača i ljudi kulture. Naš je cilj da ovim i još nekim potezima, kao što su neka vrsta strategije razvoja otvorene nauke u Srbiji, na našim univerzitetima i akademskoj zajednici, kao što su procesi udruživanja različitih pravaca razvoja, novog pristupa, statusa, ostvarivanja novog statusa nauke i ostvarivanja drugačijeg stepena vidljivosti i razumevanja šta su naučni doprinosi. Onoga što znači da nauka iz jedne zatvorene zajednice naučnika izađe u svet, jer je jedna od naših ideja, svih koji ovo podržavamo, da će onog trenutka kad svet bude stvarno video koliko je lepota naučnog istraživanja, kakve su posljedice naučnog istraživanja, ta komunikacija biti važna. Za ovako male zemlje koje vrlo često nemaju dovoljno pameti da brinu o sebi i koje vrlo često nemaju dovoljno pameti da shvate ko kako brine o njima, je to jedan od odlučujućih procesa, otuda ovo ima i društveni značaj. Ovo nije strogo stručno pitanje. Sa druge strane, razvoj savremenih biblioteka, razvoj savremenih informatičkih sistema na kojima počiva sistem akademskih zajednica i servis tih zajednica vezan je za to kako ćemo ući u ovaj proces i kako ćemo ga razvijeti. Jednom rečju, ja znam da ćemo mi za godinu, 2, 3 dana dobiti propis koji će ovo definisati, onda ćemo svi morati, ali nije svejedno kakav će taj propis biti, nije svejedno kako će naše mesto i uloga u tome da bude i nije svejedno da li smo mi, dok taj proces bude trajao, spremni da u njemu učestvujemo ili smo samo naterani da ga pratimo. Honorable guests, my really good friends, I'm so happy to have you here that I'm not quite sure that I'll be able to express my real feelings. And I'm not a kid, so sorry if I'm emotionalizing this. But for Serbia and for Belgrade, for this university and for this university library, it's so important to have you here. And we, together with your help, with your support, and with your generous view of our place in the library community, we have made this day happen. So welcome to Belgrade. Thank you for being here. We'll be seeing each other hopefully for so many times. We'll spread this good word around in the region and everything. And I'm not going to waste your time. I had some, long speech about philosophy saying, what the openness really means. But perhaps in one of these discussions, I will try to say that. Because the openness, which actually is the underlying concept of any sort of democracy or interaction or interchange between people, that is a basic foundation of human society. And as much as I can, even as a humble professor of Serbian literature in the 20th century, I do stand for it and I do support that. Welcome to Belgrade. And now I will ask our very honorable friend and colleague, Mr. Dejan Vesliković from Ministry of Culture, who is one of the very few who understands what is going in modern world and who is really supportive to every part of digitalization, digital humanities, and now he's supporting open science even more than the academic community in Belgrade. Mr. Vesliković, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, first of all, I want to welcome you on behalf of the Ministry of Culture, especially to welcome our guests from Europe, professors, experts, for supporting the Serbian science and especially for supporting the University Library of Belgrade. Now I will continue in Serbian. Dame i gospodo, dragi prijatelji, kolege, hvala vam što ste se odazvali pozivu Univerzitetske biblioteke i došli da prisustvujete jednom izuzetno značajnom predavanju, konferenciji o otvorenim podacima u nauci. Ako želimo da razvijamo državu, društvo, ekonomiju u bilo kom pravcu, moramo taj razvoj da baziramo na društvu znanja. Da bismo stvorili društvo znanja i da bi znanje bilo svima dostupno i da bi znanje bilo transparentno, uporedivo i kompatibilno sa drugim znanjima, mi moramo da otvorimo naše podatke i moramo sve ono što radimo, stvaramo u laboratorijama, u našim učionicama, u institutima, da bude dostupno svima, istraživačima, studentima, profesorima širom sveta. Samo tako ćemo moći na prvom mjestu da uporedimo svoj nivo znanja, svoj status u odnosu na druge centre znanja i druge studentske univerzitetske centre, a samim tim ćemo moći da uporedimo gde smo, šta smo, ko smo i koliko nam treba da napredujemo da ih stignemo i koliko nam treba da bismo nauku i društvo razvili do nivoa kada više nećemo biti samo puki proizvođači, radnici, sklapači nekih proizvoda, nego ćemo sami raditi na kreiranju, inovacijama i stvaranju novih proizvoda i isto to znanje prodavati dalje u svetu. Još jednom se zahvaljujem cenjenim i uglednim predavačima koji će svoje iskustvo i znanje preneti vama i zahvaljujem se organizatorima na izuzetnom odabiru teme i naporu koji ulažu da nauka u Srbiji bude otvorena i dostupna svima. Hvala vam još jednom.
Dragi prijatelji, dragi gosti, želim da vam još jednom poželim dobrodošlicu u Univerzitetsku biblioteku, a pre svega da se zahvalim našim partnerima iz Knowledge Services, organizacije koja pomaže promociju otvorene nauke. Bez njih ne bi mogli da organizujemo ovako kvalitetan skup sa kvalitetnim predavačima. Hvala još jednom. I ja ću dati reč Tiberiusu Ignjatu koji će najaviti naše govornike. Tiberius, can you please announce our distinguished speakers?
Thank you very much, and good morning to everybody. Thank you for being here, for attending this event, and I'd like to address special thank you and our best greetings to our colleagues here in Belgrade, to the University of Belgrade University and the library, for all the efforts to make this happening and organizing, having that understanding today that it was a public holiday, that you haven't been announced, so you are still here. And for all these things, thank you very much for being here and interested. It is probably not a coincidence that open science policy have been launched in Serbia these days, and not many countries have this in Europe. So thank you very much for organizing this event, for organizing it in this way, and for having us here. Before we start, I'd like to announce you this Slido code. You probably know everything about Twitter and everything else, but for Slido, this will be an important tool for today. It will be a chance to address questions, and for those who doesn't have a particular question to address, to vote for existing questions. So please use it intensively. It will guide us throughout the day and for the panel. Thank you very much for this. And now it's time to introduce our first speaker here, Mr. Dr. Paul Harris from University College in London. Through their publishing arm, the UK's first open access press, the UCL Press, they have been a partner of this event for 4 years now, and we thanks to UCL Press very much for this support. Dr. Harris is the Vice Provost of UCL for Library Services, and he joined UCL in '97. He is a historian. He has a PhD in ecclesiastic history and publishes in English Reformation. He's the former president of Liber Conference. Liber Conference is a We are collaborating with Liber Conference for organizing this event, and Dr. Eris has been a president of Liber Conference and an advisor of Liber Board later on, and the co-chair of LERU, the European League of Research Universities, which has an association with University of Belgrade and other 7 universities in Eastern Europe. And he is the co-chair of Info Community. He chairs many other committees, including the CERN workshop on innovation in scholarly communication and the GISC collections content strategy group. Dr. Eris, please. And maybe you join us for a longer.
Could I have my presentation loaded? Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for the invitation. This is my first visit to Belgrade. I hope it won't be my last. And I'm looking forward to the interactions that we have with the audience today as we share our ideas about open science and its role, potential role for universities. These are the things that I'm going to talk about in the next 30 minutes. I'm going to give the view of LERU, the League of European Research Universities, 24 research-intensive universities across the continent of Europe. I chair the Scholarly Communications Group of LERU, and we are tasked with leading LERU's approach to open science across those 24 universities. So the views I'm going to be sharing with you today are the views of the 24 rectors of LERU as to how they can or would find challenges in implementing open science principles and practice. So I'm going to talk about cultural change, which is a really important theme that the LERU rectors have identified as being an important starting point for any university or country wanting to embrace open science principles. Then I'm very briefly going to go through the 8 pillars of open science as defined by the European Commission and share with you LERU's views on how universities can adopt these 8 principles in the 8 pillars, and then try and talk to some sort of conclusion. So these are the 8 pillars of open science that have been defined by the European Commission. And I'm going to talk very briefly about each of them in turn, with examples, mainly from my university in London, on the changes we've introduced in order to deliver these 8 principles. So the future of scholarly publishing, 2 about research data, the European Open Science Cloud, and then fair data, how you make your data available for sharing and reuse following fair principles. Skills development, research integrity, how do you ensure that the principles you're following in an open science world are the best possible ones that give you results which are verifiable, reproducible, and respected by the academic community. Then what you do with your reward systems in your university, how do you reward open science practices, how do you get recognition for following open science principles. Something about metrics and evaluation, which the Commission has called alt metrics, and then a little something on the 8th pillar, citizen science, how universities can engage with the general public in order for the general public to become researchers alongside university researchers and be part of the research process, redefining what the role of universities is in a modern European society. So let's look at the first point that the LERU rectors made, that open science requires a really deep-seated cultural change in your organization. And if you don't make this cultural change first, you're not going to be able successfully to embed open science practices in your institution. So we have produced an open science roadmap. It's an open access document, and this is the URL for that document. And I led the working party that produced the 41 recommendations. The main recommendation, before you start looking at those 8 pillars of open science, is what do you do to prepare your university to accept radical change? Universities on the whole tend not to like radical change because we're elderly institutions. My university is nearly 200 years old. It's the 3rd oldest university in England after Oxford and Cambridge. And we have a radical tradition. We were invented in 1826 to introduce radical change into the English university system. But even my university finds radical change difficult to embrace on day one. So what is the secret of introducing cultural change? Well, in order to introduce open science into your organization, the Leru rectors feel you need to do something like this. You need someone who will lead. So you need a leader in your university who is going to be the leader for open science. And in my university, that's me. That's why I'm a pro-vice provost. I'm responsible for introducing open science changes in all those 8 areas of open science into the organization. You have to manage the change. It doesn't just happen on its own. You don't just issue a series of diktats and then expect people to follow them. And certainly in my university, life doesn't work like that. That would be absolutely the worst thing to do, just to tell people what to do. That in the UK, that rarely works. So you need to engage with your academics. So it's a conversation, a discussion, a partnership, a collaboration. Open science is a process, not a single event, where you're engaging with your community and convincing them of the benefits of changing the way they work. And you do this by inspiring them, by informing them, and getting your plan integrated into the strategic plan of the organization. So your plan becomes the university's plan, and you're working on this as a community together. And if you want to look at it another way, you can think of it as a table of actions, and you undertake the actions in this order. You appoint your leader, you have developed targeted measures, so you have a plan, you're going to manage that change, you know what you're going to do. You implement those changes with transparency so that everybody knows what you're doing, and you're not simply issuing a series of diktats and expecting people to undertake things that you say. And then you build, as a result of this openness and this transparency, trust and confidence from your audience, which will mean they're more likely to engage with the radical changes that you're going to undertake. So for introducing cultural change in your organization, these were the 4 recommendations that the Leru rectors, the vice chancellors of these 24 universities said you should do. You should appoint a senior manager to lead in your university, across the whole university, on open science approaches. You develop this program of cultural change, which encourages people to think differently about the way they work. And you establish an advocacy program, like the workshop today is an advocacy program, trying to engage with the new community about what the benefits of open science are once you've introduced those principles into your organization. And you draw up a communications strategy which enables the whole university to understand and become familiar with what you're doing. If you want to put cultural change into practice, these are the first 4 steps that the Leru rectors felt were necessary in their universities in order to deliver the kind of radical change that the open science introduces. So let's look at the 8 pillars of open science and look in a bit of detail how some universities, mainly my own university in central London, what we've done to develop services and facilities around the 8 principles of open science that the European Commission has identified. And we'll start with the first one, the future of scholarly communication. And in our Leru roadmap, of those 41 recommendations we made, 5 of them refer to the future of scholarly publishing. So my university has set up an open access press. It's the first fully open access university press in the UK. I'm the head of the press. It's a department of the library, so I run it alongside the library. And when I talk to my academic colleagues and researchers in UCL about the possibility of establishing a press, these were the types of points that they made in that discussion. So I talked about a year and a half with academics in the organization before I asked for money to develop the press. And these are some of the points that came up in discussion. And let me point particularly to two of them. So in the center of the diagram at the bottom, establishing the press would be consistent with open science principles. Well, it would be, because it's an open access press, and you've removed cost to, at the end user point of view, from the end user's point of view, you've removed cost as a barrier to usage. And the one in the middle, you deliver global impact because more people are able to read the outputs of the research that you're paying for, that the state is paying for, if the state is paying the wages of academics through block grants. So this is the result of UCL Press as a, following our establishment in 2015. We're downloaded, our outputs are downloaded in 222 countries across the world. So practically every country in the world and every territory in the world. Even in North Korea, we have 15 downloads from North Korea. It's the only contact my university has with North Korea is downloads of the press titles. And how many downloads do you think we get from Serbia? Do you think we get any downloads from Serbia? I'm seeing some shaking heads, some people nodding. Give me a figure. Anyone want to guess how many Serbians have downloaded UCL Press titles? It's 1,500 downloads from Serbia. All our titles are in English. We do publish in non-English languages, but at the moment the list is entirely English language, and we've had 1,500 downloads from Serbia. And we get about 100,000 downloads a month from the titles that we're producing. Now, of course, in an open access world, other people have other views on what the future of scholarly publishing looks like. My university's view was to found a university press and to undertake your own publishing on the grounds that this could be open access on day one, and you would get those kind of benefits that I've been illustrating, those large numbers of downloads from countries all across the world. So you're sharing your research with society across the world. Another way of looking at the future of scholarly publishing is to adopt the principles in Plan S, which is being developed by Science Europe, encouraged by the European Commission, to change current commercial publishing practices. So not to invent publishing again with a new publishing consortium like UCL Press, but to change the existing publishing model. And Plan S is about making certain things that we do at the moment in terms of publishing in hybrid journals. For example, publishing an open access version of an article alongside a subscription version of an article in the same journal. That practice was introduced as a means of transitioning to a fully open access world. That was the point of having hybrid journals. The fact is that hybrid journals have not delivered the wholesale change that open science requires. And so Plan S is saying that in future, certainly from the 1st of January 2020, that kind of hybrid publishing is not going to be possible because the funders who have signed up to Plan S, and our funder in the UK, UKRI, UK Research and Innovation, is a signatory to Plan S. The Wellcome Trust, which is Europe's largest biomedical funder, who live just around the corner from my university in Euston Road, they've also recently signed to the principles of Plan S as well. So this is another way of changing the future of scholarly publishing by making it not possible to publish under current in the current publishing regime in a hybrid journal, but to encourage pure open access publishing from day one. And in the implementation plan, which will govern how Plan S is actually implemented in the member states who are in receipt of funding from these research funders, will be issued just before Christmas, and we'll be able to comment on the implementation plan. So the second and third pillars of open science, as identified by the Commission, are to do with research data management, and fair data, and 10 of those 41 recommendations are about research data. And one of the major developments which the Commission is funding with £300 million up to 2020, then generously handing the ability to fund that project over to the member states after 2020, is EOSC, the European Open Science Cloud, and the EOSC is being launched in Vienna, formally launched in Vienna, since Austria has the presidency of the Council at the moment. That's being launched later this month. And the EOSC is an attempt to bring together in one front end open research data, so not simply the publication, the article or the book, but the underlying data on which that publication is based. EOSC is about aggregating that data, or at least the metadata describing that data, into one front end, into the European Open Science Cloud, and making all that material available for sharing and reuse. So in your universities, after today, I'm suggesting you go back and say, how are we as a university going to contribute to the European Open Science Cloud? It isn't open just to member states. My own country will no longer be a member state after the 29th of March. We're still going to contribute to the European Open Science Cloud and have to pay for it, of course, but we'll do that because we want to do that. The same option is open to Serbia, and I would suggest it is an absolute requisite if you want to be considered seriously as a research performing nation, that you do interface with the European Open Science Cloud. So the question is how, what are the rules of engagement by which my university can make its data and research assets available for searching and reuse through the cloud and through each of these three areas of activity that are currently ongoing. So there's a level of activity around data culture and fair data, and one of the requisites of sharing your data and making it available through the Open Science Cloud is that it is fair. It meets the FAIR principles, that it's findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. If your data is fair, it's then eligible for being made available as open data through the cloud, but you need to train your researchers to produce fair data, or to convince them that there are benefits in making their data fair and documenting the process as the prelude to sharing it with through the cloud. And that's quite a challenge, to try and get a bunch of researchers who currently don't really, in my university, they do document their data, but it isn't by default open data. And if I went and said, well, is your data fair? 95% of them would say, I don't know what you're talking about. So that's the level of challenge to move from where we are now to where we want to be, which is to have all data fair and to make it available for sharing and reuse as open data through the cloud. And who's responsible for making that change? Well, the researcher, obviously, because they are producing the data, but it tends, in a university, it would tend, certainly in Western Europe, it would tend to be the library, who has an advocacy team, or has set up an advocacy team that goes out to train people in research data management and the principles and benefits of making their data fair. So what I've done in my library is to establish a new team of research data librarians who do that, who do all the advocacy and do all the training to make researchers' data available for sharing through the Open Science Cloud. There are a number of other things that you need to do, and I've listed some of them here on the slide. You learn much more from the outputs of the LEARN project, which was an EU-funded project. I led the project, and Ignacy, who is speaking later today, was also a member of that project. One of the outputs was a model research data management policy. So go back to your university and say, do we have a research data management policy? Is there a university policy? And what, if we don't have one, what should that policy say in terms of roles and responsibilities, how costs are made, and where curation, long-term curation, is going to be possible, so that we can share our data through vehicles like the European Open Science Cloud. So policy development is really an important starting point too, if you're going to embrace open data, which is what the principles of open science say that you should do. Skills I've already talked about a little bit. We are introducing skills training sessions in my organization, and we're starting with early career scientists, so our PhD students. And this is a picture of a group of PhD students in my organization being trained in open access principles and practice and research data in one of our training suites. If you capture them young, early in their career, they will become the next generation of permanent researchers in the organization, and they will embrace openness as the norm. And what we've said, what David Bogle, Professor David Bogle, who's my opposite number, as head of the doctoral school in UCL, what he has said to me is that he wants to make open science and openness one of the principal characteristics of the UCL doctoral experience, so that we're producing researchers who see open as the default rather than the exception. And that's a really brave thing for the head of the doctoral school to say, but I've been talking to him about open science for the last 2 or 3 years, and he's come to accept that this is the future of research. This is what research looks like, and he wants his researchers, whom he is training and producing, to be open by default. And you start that early by getting them, as soon as they come into the doctoral school, and you start training them in open science principles and practices. So I talked, the next pillar is on research and integrity. How do you ensure that the processes that you're following do follow best practice in research performance? I talked about a research data management policy. You really need a parallel policy too. I'm sure your universities have one, a research integrity code that will embrace these 8 principles of open science. My university has its own research integrity code, which sets the framework for how you do good and virtuous research in the organization, the ethical principles that you embrace, and the ethical practices that you follow when you're using personal or sensitive data, for example. You can either write your own research integrity code and ensure that it embraces the 8 principles of open science, the 8 principles that I'm talking about this morning, or you could use a ready-made code, a pan-European code. The ALIA code would work perfectly well in a research organization which didn't have its own research integrity policy. But having an overarching policy which embraces open science principles is a really important part of doing good research. So we're on the homeward stretch now. We're into the last 3 pillars of open science. And the next one is rewards. Now, why is reward such an important principle? It's an important principle because you're asking your researchers to make a massive number of changes very quickly. You're asking them to publish differently, not to publish in high impact factor journals, not to publish in hybrid journals. Plan S means that 3/4 of the journals in which academics currently publish will not be eligible for APC funding once Plan S is introduced, if it's introduced in its present form. We'll have to see what the implementation plan says, but the level of APC is too high, or there is an embargo period in the organization of the journal, and that will make it invalid under Plan S as a vehicle for publishing. So Plan S being implemented in its present form will completely change the way that academics can publish their research. You're asking them to share their research data. You're training them how to describe their data to make their data fair for sharing and reuse. So it's only fair that you should reward them for making these massive changes. So that's why rewards is a principle of open science. And in my university, we have done this through changing the promotions procedure. So we have a promotions procedure, and it's available as an open access document. Here is the link at the bottom of the screen. And I spent 2 years working with our human resources department to change the academic promotions framework, to embed openness as a core criterion in the request that an academic can make for promotion. And we were so successful, actually, that openness is now a core criterion that has to be present in every application for promotion in order to be considered a serious proposal. There was no mention of openness in the earlier promotions framework. It was all about publishing in high impact factor journals. So I had to take all that wording and all those thoughts out of the policy because they're not open science principles. Journal impact factors tell you absolutely nothing about the quality of an individual article in a journal. And since they don't do that, you shouldn't use them for promotion, and you shouldn't use them as a mark of academic quality against individual articles because they don't mean anything. And that's a false assumption to say that a journal impact factor equals every article in this issue of a journal is of the same quality, because we know that half the articles in commercial journals are not read at all. So you can't use the impact factor to say that article is high impact because it's got that impact factor, because nobody could have read it. And why are you rewarding that? So that's the kind of change that you would need to make in your promotions procedures in order to introduce open science practices. And that's what we've done. So in the UCL promotions procedure, which is listed here on the screen, we don't talk about journal impact factors. We have signed the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, which forbids the use of journal impact factors officially as a criterion for appointment to the university, or for promotion once you are in the university, or for appraisal once you're being evaluated annually as part of your contract with the university. So we've covered that. This policy covers the promotions bit. My next task is to extend that to cover appointments to the university and the annual appraisal process for all academic appraisals within the institution. But since it's in the promotions framework, while it's going to be a challenge to move it to the other frameworks as well, to appointments and to appraisal, it should be more straightforward because we've already made the major leap, which is to put it in the promotions framework. All metrics, responsible use of metrics. I've already begun to talk about this by saying the journal impact factor is a waste of time and you shouldn't use it for most of the practices you're probably currently using it for already, certainly for promotions and for rewards. But that's a big change, to change those policies and to change culture and understanding about what the correct evaluation of research outputs is. And I illustrate this through a UK survey that I worked with HEFCE, one of our funding bodies, to implement at the end of last year. So these results are just about the UK, but I don't believe that they are significantly different anywhere else in Europe either. I think you'd find the same sorts of answers and the same sorts of conservative approaches to change as we found in this small questionnaire on research metrics. So I drew up a questionnaire of 14 questions, and we had 96 responses. We have about 170 universities in the UK, so about 2/3 of them, well, maybe over half to 2/3, answered the questions. I'm just going to give just a couple of examples from the questionnaire. So question one was, Does your research organization have a research metrics policy? Do you have a university policy which explains, no matter what kind of use you make of evaluation, do you have a policy which everybody has accepted and everybody has approved? So you're all doing the same thing. So the question is saying, are you basically all doing the same thing in terms of your use of research metrics? Do you have a policy? And look here, 53 named institutions, 75 of the 91 responses said no, we haven't got a policy at all. And yet they're using metrics all over the place in the university to do all kinds of things. And they have no policy which explains to people using them how those metrics, what the responsible use of metrics is. So going back to your universities, does your university have a policy on research metrics? I suspect the answer with respect maybe no, but so go away and think about that, because in an open science environment, that's completely unacceptable, that you're using metrics in a way without explaining how you're using them and what you're using them for. And this is certainly true in the UK, where most of the respondents didn't have a policy which governed how they were using metrics. Another question was, has your research organization signed DORA, the San Francisco Declaration on Research Evaluation, which forbids the use of journal impact factors to assess quality of academic quality of individual articles. And here, 75 institutions said no, they hadn't signed it. 21 said yes, and I'm happy to say that my university was one of the 21 who had signed it, because we have signed it. So that's the depth of the challenge, to change the way you use metrics and evaluation, because the current practice is just so deeply embedded in the current system, but is so completely alien to the principles and policies of open science. The last pillar of open science is citizen science, and it recognizes the general citizen as an equal player in the research process alongside a university researcher. And open science principles recommends creating a single institutional point of contact for citizen science. So what we're going to do in my university is to create a citizen science office, which will be run by me as the coordinator for citizen science practices across the university, but will encourage work with university researchers in the institution to engage with society and to bring in the general citizen as co-workers in research activity. And that's redefining what the role of a university is, certainly in a metropolitan city like London, where citizens and professional researchers are working alongside each other, and it's a partnership and a community building. So that, for us in the West, that's a really important point, because it redefines how universities are appreciated by society and the value that people perceive universities give to society as a result of the funding they receive. So what are the conclusions from this tour of open science in Europe, and what does it look like to implement a roadmap to deliver open science practices? Well, this is a roadmap. I think one of our introductory speakers explained I was a historian, so I am a historian, so many of my examples are historical examples. This is a European roadmap. It's the largest surviving European roadmap. It's called the Mappa Mundi, a map of the world. It's drawn in my country, in Lincoln, on the eastern side of the country, in around the year 1300. And it's a medieval view of the world, or the known world, at the beginning of the 14th century. The scribe, I don't think, had traveled very far, because if you look at the Latin names on the map, you see that he has mixed up his continents. So he calls Africa Europe, and Europe Africa. So I don't think he traveled very far. So he was doing this from books or from secondhand, from things that people had told him. But my country is there, right at the edge of the known world in 1400, where we probably will be next year after we leave the Union, but that's a separate discussion. That is England, right at the edge of the known world. In the center of the map, this is not a road map in a geographical sense, it's a theological map, because right in the center of the map is Jerusalem. So this man's view of the world is a theological view based on the Christian New Testament, with Jerusalem and the Holy City right at the center of his world. What we're suggesting in this talk is that you take the principles, but you change the focus. So you do have a roadmap, but instead of putting Jerusalem at the center, you put open science, and then everything else will follow from that discussion. So if you have been listening, thank you very much. I'm very happy to hear questions now or in the panel session later on in the day. Thank you for your time.
Are there any questions for Dr. Paul Harris for now? Or you'd like to address them in the panel? Or through Slido?
Through Slido, I think.
Through Slido. Having said that, there's no question who came in yet in Slido, but we do expect them. So please start addressing your questions by during the sessions, and please don't be shy. Address them, and it will cost nothing. I'm monitoring and administrating the Slido. So we'll also have a poll after the first break, where we'll test the structure of the audience, and we'll ask what kind of position best describe your job, so that the speakers knows to whom they talk, and also at the end, the co-organizers, the University of Library and the University of Belgrade and the Library of University of Belgrade will know what kind of steps to adapt further on. Our next speaker for today is Vanessa Proudman, the director of Spark Europe. Spark is the Scholarly Publishing Academic Resources Coalition, and it's working for making the open default in Europe. Vanessa has a big and long-standing international experience working with libraries, research institutions, policymakers, IT departments, and IT professionals. She ran over 10 years a UN-affiliated research institution in Vienna. She is also well known for a consultancy concept she is doing, which is Proud to Know, helping research libraries in Europe to develop and to embrace new development lines. She was also the product and project manager at Europana. So I invite Vanessa to address her presentation to you today.
Sorry to keep you on tenterhooks. So if that wasn't already enough challenges to look at, which Paul very clearly described, so the really important steps and priorities, I'm also going to add to the challenge, and it's thinking about infrastructure. And infrastructure really underpins all what we do. And a lot of the time we forget about it. We think it will always be there to serve us. But if we don't think as a community, and community I mean researchers, libraries, and funders, if we don't as a community think about how to fund that infrastructure, it may not be there to support the policy work that we're now implementing, the services. So that's why I'm here today to talk about how important this is, talking about how to fund open science infrastructure as a community. And we're in our very early steps with this. And I will talk to you about one particular initiative, I hope, once the slides are up. Shall I? Yeah, we could try again. I suppose it's probably good to have some slides. I have also I have a USB stick. Sorry about this. desktop and don't start up from the, if you just copy from the USB onto the desktop before opening it. So, okay. Okay. Yes. Fingers crossed. I know it works. Yes. So my slides get the applause, yes. Thank you. So thank you for your patience. So I really believe that it's high time that we rethink about how we pay for open science infrastructure. Often we're really focused on our subscription fees. We are also very glad to be part of open access or open science projects where we acquire money, but what about spending money on infrastructure together? So let me just tell you something very briefly about Spark Europe, because maybe some of you don't know us yet. So the key goal is making open the default, which is quite a challenge in itself, and helping ensure that open access and open science is really fully realized. So if you look at this picture here, what we're doing is we're working on creating a climate in which open research and education thrives. Can you hear me all right? I usually have quite a loud voice anyway, so. So what we're really looking at, so if we think about policy or infrastructure, it's having a healthy soil here with good nutrients, no poisons, good fertilizers, making sure that it's watered well. And so without that, we cannot grow our open access, open science, provide access to our research. So we are trying to work on providing the good conditions for that, and infrastructure belongs to that. So what we're doing is we focus very much on driving policy, European policy. We're looking at legislation that's being developed on copyright reform at the moment, on public sector information, so providing access to research data more effectively, and also at the new the large European funding program, FP9, to make sure that there's an open access and open science mandate that supports our work. We are also supporting policy development amongst nations and funders. So we're also looking at what funders in Europe, what kind of open access and open science policies do they have in place? Oh, really? No, then I'll stand here. No, I'd rather not have two things. Could you hear me all right? Yes, okay, right, thanks. And we also do some policy reporting in Europe on research data, so we give updates on national policy developments, so that if you're thinking of developing your own national policy, you can look at others. We also provide advocacy guidance and tools. That's essential to our work as well, so it's not just the policy work. And cultural change, as Paul was talking about, what's really important is also how do you engage between your researchers and libraries to create change and get the researchers to actually move that forward for you. So we like activities in that area. And the last but not least, what I'm talking about today is about supporting the sustainability of open infrastructure. We talked, I think Paul already talked about Plan S, and I think I'll swiftly run through that, how we're supporting it. Yes. We also came up with 10 ways how libraries can support the implementation of Plan S, so that we can help influence what that looks like, and how libraries can engage with funders to make this happen. So, right. So I think, and also that goes for your country too, there's been a lot of development in policy. We have a lot to be thankful for all the hard work that a lot of us have put into on a European level on developing open access and open science policies. So on the European level with the Competitiveness Council, where all the ministers of industry and research signed up to make research openly available by 2020. There are national policies developed, funder policies. Yourselves, you just launched a policy, and congratulations with that. That will support you no end, I'm sure. And institutional policies, my last count was there were about 600 in Europe. Now, but with policies, so without extra funding or without thinking about the funding of policy, and also it's important that we need to think about that we really need to have a stable infrastructure to enable us to implement that policy. Yes. So there are some additional costs that come with that. And either the funders give us additional money, or we have to also reshuffle some of our budgets, which is at the moment we need a mix, and this is new, and we're looking at different business models and how to approach funding right now. But I think we need to also, as a community, to take responsibility for upholding a strong infrastructure that will support our work. So if we think about what's been happening over the years, a lot of us have been funded by short-term project funding. So there's been a lot of money put into developing services, repositories, etc. And there's been a very large offering of scholarly communication solutions developed by libraries, but also by researchers. I think many of you will know this 101 on innovative tools and sites in 6 research workflow phases. Sorry, it's a bit of a long, big mouthful there. But you can see the range of scholarly communication tools that have been developed over the years. And some of those have survived, a lot of them have. But we also need to think about, so there is a huge plethora of services and some of those infrastructure that supports our work. And some of those have been in existence for a number of years. They started off as projects and built on business models that maybe today aren't working for them, and where they are concerned about their financial future because that project funding has run out and other seed funding, etc. So it's thinking about those services that we depend upon. And why is it important? If we think about publisher or company diversification, if you think about the Elsevier's, but also Microsoft, who purchased GitHub a couple of weeks ago. I don't know whether you know that. So there are quite some concerns that we want to remain independent. We want to look after some of this essential infrastructure, that it's not bought up by necessarily commercial companies whose main focus is profit making rather than our mission-oriented goals as institutions to serve research and society. So it's really important. So how can we try to prevent this movement from getting out of hand and take some responsibility in that? So my 4 signposts, before I show you some of the work that's going on in this area, what we really need is a fair and stable and sustainable scholarly communication infrastructure. We don't want an imbalanced commercial exploitation of science through open access. There's no longer a place for monopolies to call the shots, right? So we need to take this as a community more into our own hands as well. And how can I get rid of this thing in the corner here? Sorry, somebody can... I can't see a mouse here at all. Oh, help. No, that's a shame. There's no mouse there. Never mind. Okay. Yes. So as I say, we need to take more control over our scholarly communications. And there is a real need then for a European regulatory body. I've been told by the head of policy at the European Commission that they are working on this. So that's good news, but that's in the background. And I'm not just going to sit quietly and hope for the best. Yes, so I think that we can take some collective action now. So, right, that's what I've been saying. So, just like we perhaps at home we have our savings for gas, for electricity, etc. I think what we also need to do, if we are working on open access and open science, we also need to set aside funds for that infrastructure that supports our work, and to see that that is a necessary spend. I know it's difficult because our budgets are often really very stretched, but we need to think about how can we even fill this pot just a little bit, yes, and increase that over time. And if all of us do that, then we can contribute significantly to the costs of infrastructure. So what we can also do is support a number of business models. So there are a number of collective funding mechanisms. You've got the Open Library of Humanities, some of you may have heard, so how you collectively as libraries pay to unlock journal articles in the humanities sector. You've also got Knowledge Unlatched that also does something similar for journals, but also books and for some services. So where a number of organizations put money in a pot and then they contribute to the funding or unlocking of open access. And you've got other models, different models. Archive.org, as we know, is an essential service and has been running for many, many years. But they have a very interesting business model here where you have many members signing up for a number of 5 years, certain amount of dollars, thousands of dollars per year, but they also have match funding by a particular funder who matches that amount of funding, and there's money from the institution. So it's a mixed model so that they remain sustainable. So we need to look at some of those models when we're building our own services, so to help sustain them, but also to put money into some of these services to help collectively fund those, right? And there is actually quite, we've been in this game probably only since last year, or the beginning of last year, but this year there's been quite a boom to really look at investing in open infrastructure. We've got Spark North America that is looking at the diversification of services amongst various publishers, and then to bring this knowledge to the research community and for us to learn about what are our opportunities, what are the threats, and where could we invest in the longer term. You've also got the 2.5% commitment movement, or invest in open. That is it's somebody called David Lewis last year who said maybe libraries should put aside 2.5% of their library budgets to spend on open science. The 2.5%, it turned out, wasn't really such a great number pulled out of the air, but it's for us to think about, should we earmark a certain amount for investing in open science? Yes, that's what I need. Thank you very much. Sorry, I've been the annoying one coughing already, and this doesn't make it easier. Excuse me. So, yeah. So that's top slicing library budget. So that's also a way of us to think about how could we fund, and how they're trying to approach this is by looking at what is key infrastructure, what is the ecosystem, what are we talking about, and also asking US institutions, how much are you spending, right? So, so that's an interesting project to look out for. That will be finished, I think, by the end of next year, but that helps inform libraries to think more about what they're already investing and what should they be investing in. Now, the Joint Roadmap for Open Science Tools, JROS, has anybody heard of them yet? They're very new. Okay, excellent. I'm glad I'm telling you at least one thing that's new. So JROS is really exciting. It's called the Joint Roadmap for Open Science Tools. It's led by a US institution. I think a number of these are known to you: Mozilla, Hypothesis, you've got DataCite and, and others. And it's looking at the ecosystem of open science tools and how can they work better together, perhaps with open protocols. Also, how can you strengthen some of these? Some of these are startups, some of these are a bit longer standing institutions. How can they be strengthened as organizations? What does a good governance structure look like? So that's really important if you think about a solid organization that takes something forward into the future. How do they manage? What business models are they built on? Can they learn from each other to strengthen business models? So this is a great space to have those conversations with a number of open science tools, right, that are serving us, okay? This is not so much about funding, although that is a topic, but that's an exciting development. So please watch that space. Operas, how about operas? Who's heard of them? Couple of people, yes. So this is really exciting because they are also looking at the whole ecosystem of information providers, service providers in the area of social sciences and humanities, and looking at what it also means to pay the way, pay the cost together, and develop excellent services together in a group. So it's distributed but shared services, and more effectively working together to develop those, but also to fund them, all right? So it's looking at funding the whole ecosystem to serve a large discipline, right? I think that's really exciting. That's the way to go. So this has been built on a couple of EU projects, but they are actually going to establish an organization shortly. So also watch that space, please. Operas. Now, how about this one? Human Frontier Science Program, maybe also new. So this is a very interesting initiative. This is where a number of funders, international funders, expressed concern that they were worried about certain essential databases, the genome database and others, that they need to be there in years to come. How are they going to ensure that those essential research resources, mainly data resources, will be there in the future? And what they're looking to do, they're working on a business plan now, as far as I know. How can they collectively put money aside in their funders, in their funding budgets, to ensure that money goes into sustaining those services, right? And this is for the life sciences. So just before, we were looking at here, this is a lot of publishers, libraries, research communities, but this is funders, right? Looking at how they can pay the way forward to support open research. So I think that's also a very interesting development, again, for a discipline. And then another group, so myself included, and JROS and others are quite passionate about moving this forward, about advocating for funding open science. So we have formed a group, it's called Invest in Open Infrastructure, where we are sharing experiences, and we all want to sing from the same hymn sheet. I don't know whether you know, do you have an expression like that here? You kind of, or at least you're reading from the same page. You're on the same, well, I've forgotten my own English. Anyway, you're on the same page, yeah? You know what you're all talking about. So we're also thinking about messaging, which is the same. We all go out when we're, you know, there are different paths to funding. And I'm going to talk about one path, and this is SCOS, okay? So I probably got, have I got 10 minutes or so? Sorry, who's timekeeping? At least 10 minutes? Good. Wonderful. I'm going to use that 1 minute also to my advantage. So SCOS. So SCOS, this, has anybody, who's heard about SCOS? Few of you, okay, right, well, more of you now, I hope it will stick. So SCOS is an initiative that was born a couple of years ago, and Spark Europe has been coordinating this, helping sustain open science infrastructure Cameron Nealon. So if there's anything that you'd like to read, a little bit of background reading, please read Cameron Nealon's Principles for Open Scholarly Infrastructures. It's a really excellent paper. And he said that if everything we've gained by opening content and data will be under threat if we allow the enclosure of scholarly infrastructures. So we don't want this enclosure. We want to ensure that that remains open. So what is SCOSS? It's an open science community of organizations that promote essential infrastructure, recommending certain services that need funding to help them forward on the road to sustainability. And it's asking the crowd to help fund those. So the current SCOSS members are large networks representing the library community and the research community, mainly library at the moment. So you've got the European Library, Research Library Network of LIBA, you've got the Council of Australian University Librarians, you've got IFL, that represents across continents. You've got ourselves, you've got the Association of Research Libraries in the US, so ARL, you've got CARL, which is the Canadian group, and you've got the Association of African Universities. So they are behind this initiative. What do we mean by infrastructure? Because there's often, it's quite a challenging word to explain because lots of the time people have many different conceptions what that is. It provides, we've defined it, open science infrastructure provides the scientific and scholarly community with resources and services to access, share, and assess research. So those are the kinds of services that we promote to be funded. So it's been developed by significant players in these various communities, as I've already said. We form a consolidated voice on your behalf to make some recommendations for funding. And we also evaluate those services quite strictly before we recommend them for funding. It also creates a framework, so you don't have to do the research yourself to find out what the costs are, what the benefits are for your community, what are the user statistics. We get that for you and we make the informed decision. So it kind of helps also investors along the way. And there's also more transparency then on the costs and the funding needed to enable that fair remuneration. What we're also doing is, with this work to support open infrastructure, I'm looking at the various business models and sharing those business models with these services so that in years to come that they're also strengthened for the future. We don't support any specific discipline, and they should be non-profit. This is the evaluation criteria. So before anything is recommended for funding, they need to provide this information, technical details, what's the value proposition for which kind of communities, what are the costs over the last 2 years and also the coming year, what's your governance structure, what sustainability measures do you have in place now, and what are your plans? Right, so the key results, you're probably kind of like, oh, this all sounds very nice. But a year ago, we went out, so it's DOAJ and Sherpa Romeo for the pilot, okay? So we said to the community about a year ago, thank you, DOAJ and Sherpa Romeo are essential services. If you would like to fund them, please go ahead. And the relationship is between you as a funder and that service. We don't collect funds, right? But more than $1 million has been raised through the community from across the world, okay? Not all continents are involved yet, but still, we are really thrilled with this result. It's very much largely down to DOAJ, who's been doing lots of advocacy on this. But it shows that if you get the community together, a lot can be achieved, right? I think I already talked about, so yeah, maybe I'll talk, no, I haven't really got time to talk about capacity building, but perhaps over the lunch. And it's really about changing the mindset amongst libraries. ICOLC, so ICOLC represents the world's library consortia. This has been on the agenda for the last 2 ICOLC meetings, which is really fantastic. We never thought that. We told them about SCOS. One of our members presented SCOS, and then they wanted in the next meeting to also talk about SCOS and investing in open infrastructure. So we hope that this is going to be a regular theme and that this trickles down to, you know, all consortia for them to think about, yes, we need to invest here. Okay. Right. So this shows actually the funding by continent at the moment. So Europe has actually caught up quite a bit. Before it was quite heavy on North America. And the top countries still is United States, Norway, Australia, Sweden, Canada, Germany. Serbia not there yet, but that can change. And it doesn't have to be investing huge amounts. If we do make some recommendations on funding levels, and maybe that's one of the challenges we've had. But here we can see that DOAJ almost has reached 75% of its target. So, as I say, the challenge has been also the pricing model. It's been quite high. We have recommended for large organizations a fee which could be considered high, but it's not compared to archive, for example, is higher, right? But you can also contribute less, and there's negotiations there, but it's to reach this target as quickly as possible. That's why the fees have been higher, and it's been an experiment. So we're evaluating the program now. Yes, let me move on. Right, the good news is, so we've had 2 services that we've been promoting for funding. We published a call in about 6 weeks ago, asking the community, okay, who else, right? Who else needs support financial support to help them on the road to sustainability? And we had 36 expressions of interest come in, right? From all around the world, except for Asia and South America. But so that's really interesting. So now we have the challenge to filter down, and then those expressions of interest that fit in with our definition of infrastructure, etc., and of international interest, we will then ask them to officially apply and send in a bigger application form for next year. So what you can do, sorry, I'm slightly running over time, but I think that's probably okay, just a couple of minutes. So what you can do yourselves is think about pledging for open access and open science infrastructure within your institution, talk about it in your consortium, your national or regional ones, and within your community. Do think about perhaps contributing to Sherpa Romeo or DOAJ, however small, yes? And help promote that this is an important cause. So the 3 calls to action is also, as I was saying, explore and invest in different business models, so sharing the burden, yes, to sustain your own services as well, and to pay into current ones. Raise awareness for the need for collective action, that's what I've been talking about, in your community, and also really strive to consistently invest in open science. This is not a one-time thing. It's really to think about a responsibility to make this a budget post, you know, for years to come. So please join that community, and if you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you very much.
There are any questions for Vanessa to address right now? We saw questions coming in through Slido. Thank you very much for that. There are about 4 questions who came in, and we break now for a coffee. Immediately after, when we come back here, we'll run a first poll for trying to identify the structure of today's audience. So please be back in 20 minutes for another enthusiastic session of open science. Thank you very much. You can see them right now if you go to Slido. If it works.
Just because I said it before. Just checking. If you don't want really to do a lot of movement and things like that.
Hello, everybody. I hope it was a good refreshment break. It was all well deserved. And we run now the poll that we announced before. It will be just for probably 3-4 minutes. So if you can use this time now and vote, you don't have to register. You don't have to do anything else. Just press what is best describing your position in your institution. And then we will have at least a glance to the structure of this audience today. So instead of running questions for the next 3-4 minutes, it will run this poll. So please start voting. We already see that we have some people voting already. So thank you very much. And you can do that by going to Slido, sli.do, and introduce the code that was given. It is also on your badge here. Is F from focus, and then 11 from November and 12 from today. Please start voting in. Our next presentation today is given by Dr. Ignasi Labastida. He is the head of the Office of Dissemination of Knowledge at University of Barcelona, and also the head of the research unit of Learning and Research Resource Center. His office is leading different projects towards openness related to open education, open resources, open access, and open data by its own or in collaboration with other Catalan and Spanish universities or institutions. He is a member of a Spark Europe board, and he is a member of the Steering Committee of Information on Open Science Policy Group of LERU. He has been a member of Open Courseware Consortium, was a member of the board of this consortium, and a member of Administrative Council of Comunia, an international association of the public domain built on eponymous thematic network. Please welcome me in giving a warm welcome to, join me in giving a warm welcome to Ignasi.
Okay, thank you very much, Tiberius. Yes, don't forget to vote. Yes. Okay, thank you very much for the invitation and to be here in Belgrade. It's my first time in Belgrade, and I hope also that won't be the last one. I work in the library, but I'm a physicist. I always say that, just to make clear. And I would like to share with you what are the challenges that we face as a university or as a research center. Because when we talk about open science, and you start to talk with your rector, vice rector, or your directors, sometimes it's like a completely mess. Sometimes when we start with open science, we use this taxonomy. This is a taxonomy coming from Foster, a European project that I also recommend to visit. They have a lot of good resources. And when you show that to your rector, say, okay, that's very complicated because we are touching everything. And that's the point. I mean, when we talk about open science, we are talking about research in general. We always say that we hopefully, soon, better than later, there will be no need to talk about open science. We'll talk science in general. So when we bring this image to the people who has to decide at the university, we have to somehow show them in pieces and to decide what are we going to do. I have some challenges that you can put in a list when you want to introduce the open science principles in your research institution. First is to understand what it means. And there is not a clear understanding and probably a common definition of open science I will show you later. But we can agree on which are the areas we want to work. And it could be different. That's another important thing, that in some institution, we will have some priorities. In other institution, we'll have another priorities. And that's important to state that. We have to prepare the institution for a change. And before, Paul Iris already mentioned that we need this cultural change. And that's another really huge challenge, because working at the university, you know that it's a really conservative institution, probably one of the most conservative institutions, and even researchers are so conservative for it to change. So that's an important issue that you need to overcome. Then you also have another challenge, that is acknowledge these new ways of doing science. There are already researchers that are doing different things than the traditional ones. For instance, we have in Barcelona a group of researchers doing citizen science that they do some performance in festivals of theater. How are you going to put that in your curricula? There is not a paper, there is not a data set, so it's another way, and for them is research, and we have to acknowledge that as research. We also have new infrastructures. We need new infrastructures, and as Vanessa already mentioned, they are very important that those infrastructures must be open. So it's important to improve the infrastructures we have. We don't have to build new infrastructures. Maybe we have to join already existing infrastructures, but we have to figure out how we join and also how we sustain those infrastructures. We have to share more outputs, but not just outputs, methodologies. I mean, sometimes, and we already have, I wrote from publications that we have shared a lot of publications, but what about code? What about data? What about methodologies? There are other outputs that we need to share if we want to be in these open science principles. And finally, and I think is one of the key points, we have to reshape evaluation and assessment. And I think already Paul mentioned that. We still rely in many countries in this easy way to evaluate science. We just click a button, and if you have all the impact factors in a list, it's very easy to say you are 10, you are 20, or you are 50. But for me, this is not evaluating science. This is more like make an audit of science. Okay, where did you publish? That's the point. So those are some of the challenges that I want to address now on how we can face those challenges from this university point of view. So to start, and we did already in the Liru, was I think that every institution should have a roadmap. And it's a roadmap that can be different, as I mentioned before, from one institution to another one. Because first, we have to agree how to define open science. Then we have to identify in which areas we want to work. If I go back to the first one, you see that there are a lot of opportunities to work. There are a lot of areas to work. So maybe one institution will say, okay, I'm brave enough to start with evaluation. Good. Another institution will say, no, I will focus on data. Another institution will say, okay, I will to keep the work that I've done in publications. So there are a lot of areas that we have to identify and prioritize. I think it's important also that as an institution, we should acknowledge what has been done until now. Because sometimes we forget to mention all the work that has been done and to continue that work and to identify those leaders that are working on those areas. We have to engage with all the people that could be involved in the change. It's not just enough to say, okay, the library will lead the change. Well, it's fair enough, but we have to bring researchers, we have to bring the research officers, we have to bring the staff, we have to bring as many people as possible if we want to succeed for this cultural change. And I always suggest that also we should bring people from outside. If we want to really be open and we want to share with the society, it could be a good idea to bring people from outside and to ask them. We did that already in July. We did a conference in Barcelona called the Digital Transformation, and we want that people from outside will come to the university and we ask them, what do you expect from us? And it was really interesting to see what they were asking us, because sometimes we are just closed on those walls, looking to each other, talking about our problems, but we have to realize what the society expects to us. I think we should break those walls, not just to go out, but also to invite people to come in. We have to plan actions, and also we have to monitor the actions, because it's not enough to say, okay, I will have a policy, I will have this plan. We have a policy in Barcelona for open access from 2011. Guess who is the only one who is monitoring the policy? And once you have the actions and once you monitor the actions, it's important to review and update. Because as I always say to my vice rectors, be brave to fail. I mean, it's important to fail and to learn from failures. It's probably in this area, in open science, you don't succeed on the first time. You always have to reshape your ideas, reshape your actions. But you have to try, because it's very easy just to sit down and wait that other people will do things, and you just wait and try to get the best thing and then to copy. I think it's fair enough to begin to be part of the change and begin to try. If you succeed, perfect. But if you fail, also perfect. Just learn from failures and make this review and updating. Okay, so let's start to create the roadmap. And let's start by definitions. I just took a couple of definitions. The one from the Commission that says that open science aims at transforming science through ICT tools, networks, and media to make research more open, global, collaborative, creative, and closer to society. There are important things here. First, that open science has a goal, this transformation of science. And also another important thing is that we want to get closer to the society, as I mentioned before. If we take another definition from Wikipedia, in this case, you can change it if you don't like it, as you know. Open science is shown here as a movement, because we already were talking about the open movement, like originally the free software movement, but also the open access movement. So here, open science is seen as a movement, but again, to make scientific research data and dissemination accessible to all levels of an inquiring society. So again, the importance of the society. And here is stated, not just the professional society, but the amateur society, because that's what we are fulfilling. We are reaching to make the society get more involved with us. We can identify working areas. We put some of the areas here. The clear one, publications. We have been working a lot, many years for open access. We are more and more engaged now in research data, another important issue. There are some countries that are far away from where we are, for instance, in Catalonia. The UK are far away from us in research data, but there are good examples that we can follow, so it's important to see which are the champions on these areas. We also can identify, okay, let's work in other kind of research outputs. For an easy one could be code. So why not trying to share as much code as possible? We also have to work in this societal impact. It's not enough to do research for us, this society important issue. We have to work on evaluation. We have to work on infrastructures, on policies, well, establish which will be our plans, and go beyond science and research. As I'll show you at the end of my presentation, I think that if we are discussing here on open science, it would not make sense to skip open education. So if you are an institution and you really want to go forwards open science, probably will be a need also to go in parallel on open education, another kind of openness. So probably when we are identifying areas at the university or at an institution like this one, you have to go beyond the science and the research. When we say that we have to work with and for the people, I think we have to, as I mentioned before, to acknowledge those leaderships, to see which are the champions in all these areas we want to identify. Sure, in your institution, you have a champion on open access, a champion on research data, a champion on citizen science. So you can identify those people and bring them into the discussion. We have to identify these people doing new things, these new behaviors. Maybe you have some research group that are sharing the notebook from the lab earlier, before they are publishing. So you can go there and discuss with them, why are you doing that? Or people doing more research on societal impact, so you can bring them into the discussion. We have to begin to understand how you want to reward these new outputs and these new methodologies. An important thing, you have to train. You have to train all the people in all levels. Sometimes we focus on, okay, let's train the young ones, let's train the PhD students, but we should also train the seniors, the supervisors, because if not, the students go to the supervisor say, okay, forget about that. We have to publish in this top journal, and that's the point. So it's important to engage all levels of the institution, and you have to engage also all the staff. It's important because sometimes, for instance, in Barcelona, we have this mandatory policy that all PhD theses, dissertations must be online. But there is still people, staff people in the secretary of the schools telling our PhD students, oh, you shouldn't put that on internet because everybody will copy. And that's a problem, okay? So we have to change these mindsets, these working frames, and again, another point, to engage citizens, to bring them into the discussion. Doesn't mean that citizens should establish our research, but we could be a good idea to bring them and to discuss with them, and also to explain what we are doing, especially if you are also a public institution. So if we start to understand what we have been doing until now, we can make ourselves questions like that. For instance, if we focus in open access to publications, we could ask to ourselves, is there any institutional policy? Have we already in place a policy, a mandate that establish something like publishing in the repository? Is there an institutional repository ready to support this open access policy? And what about our institutional journals? There are a lot of institutions that are publishing journals. Are our journals open? And when I say open, I say not just public. Open needs something else, needs, for instance, a license. Not a few months ago, we were in Croatia, and we already did a training session for editors explaining what is open and what is not open, and explaining how to use a license and how to use it properly. So it's important to make those questions to ourselves. And if we have a university press, we should also ask, is our institutional press open? Doesn't mean that has to be completely open as in UCL, but maybe our university press could start some experience, some projects, some pilots on opening some collections. That's what we are doing in Barcelona. Okay, if we answer, like for instance, we have a policy, we have a repository. That's in Barcelona, we have policy, we have repository, we have open access in the journals. We have our university press somehow now more engaged in openness. But what about monitoring the policy? Who is monitoring the policy? We have a policy in 2011. I will show you now the results. But more questions. If we want to make the transition, we can ask ourselves, which is the current percentage of open access in my institution? This morning, I just was answering a message from another university, and they were surprised. Wow, we are really good in open access. We are beyond 60%. I will show you now. And they couldn't believe. They were saying, we cannot do it better than the Dutch. And I said, yes, you are doing better. I don't know, maybe the Dutch don't have the proper figures, but you are doing good. So they were surprised from the library. And they were surprised because nobody has already made that question. How are we now in open access? And we can also make calculations of how much it will cost to change the model that we have already into an open access model, the famous Plan S or whatever. So once we have all this data, we can start the discussions. So I will share with you some of this information that we have in Barcelona. This is the articles that we have in our CRIS system in gray. That's where they are the curricula of our researchers. And as you see, well, the green ones is how many papers we have in the repository. We are not doing really well, but there is people that are happy because they said it's a success to have 20%. That was some challenge, some goal that was established many years ago. If your repository has 20%, that's great. Well, I could say that for me, it's not great. But this is what we have now. But this helps when you bring this image to your vice rector and you say, we should do something in our institutional policy. I also did that for each vice rector, even the rector, of how much do you fulfill the policy. And I have to tell you that the numbers were really, really low. But then they react and they reach to the top. Another point, okay, that's not enough to know what do you have in the repository. What is your percentage of open access? This is our percentage of open access during the last 7 years. And as you see, the full gold, so meaning publishing in open access journal, is increasing year after year. That's important. Who is paying that? Is the institution paying? I will show you that not really. So probably it will be the projects, or probably it will be the researchers with their money. So it's important to give an answer to that. Even the hybrid is quite going up, but this is somehow really stable. But also is stable because we as institution, we don't pay hybrid. So it's an important issue to take into account. This bronze is something that it's a common behavior, because bronze means that the papers are publicly available, but without any license. And many publishers open their contents after 3-4 years. So the impact of bronze is bigger on the years, in the old years than in the recent years. So probably in the future, 2015-16 will be more bronzer than we are now. And green, it means only repository. Well, it also helps you to understand where are your papers, because sometimes in this green, it's not your repository. Maybe your papers are in other places, and it's important to know where are those papers. Another important thing is how researchers react when they get more chased by the funders. And this is the difference. When the commission asks them, you must publish in an open access journal or to put it in the repository, then the percentage goes higher, almost to 70%. So probably if you have a strength policy, probably the researchers will react in a different way. We did that also to make a bit of competition between different centers. We did that last October during the Open Access Week. We want to put all our centers in competition. Who is the most open of the centers? You know who is? The library. The library, I mean, not the library, but the library science school, the School of Library, okay? They are reaching almost 90%. Who is the closest? Geology. We call it the earth science now, the School of Earth Science. So it doesn't, they publish more, of course, they publish more papers than the library studies, but they are more close. And it's important to see, for instance, the green one. Anyone want to guess who is this one? Mathematics, and the effect of archive, for instance. And with this, you can have different behaviors, and you can study, for instance, the Dean of Economics is pushing to have all the papers in the repository, and that's why economics also has a lot of green. Okay? And another surprise is art. Art is very gold. And it's because usually art do not publish papers. They just publish a few papers. But most of the journals in art where they publish are local, and those local journals are completely open. So it's important to have all the data to discuss with those researchers, why do you publish there, what do you need to have more green, et cetera, et cetera. And also you can make these comparisons with other institutions. That methodology is also been used in the Netherlands here. And then you can figure out with the Netherlands how do you perform with other institutions, not just in your country, but also in other countries. And you see here, for instance, in the Netherlands, the effect of hybrid due to this offsetting and these negotiations that they have with different publishers. We also publish all the funds that we give to our researchers for publishing open access, and that's also important to share because this project also make a lot of information about the price of APCs. This is a project called Open APC, and if you have funds for publishing or you have information about what are you publishing or how much do you paying for APCs, it would be important to put all that information in this project. And then when you have all this picture of what has been done until now, then we can start discussing with data and evidences about could we achieve 100% of open access in publications, as is one of the goals? Are we ready for this offsetting or flipping or all these kind of transitions to open access? Are we going to pay more, to pay less? And what about these new ideas of the publications, publishing platforms, these new tools for disseminate your results that they are also offering open peer review, and they don't rely on any impact factor? That's another important issue that we have to face in the future. We also can have the same picture in other subjects. For instance, in the area of infrastructures, we can ask ourselves, do we provide a repository for publications, data, and code? Is our repository ready to have data? And what about research data management? Are we giving some facilities to our researchers to work with data? Because sometimes when you ask them, they will tell you, I'm using Dropbox, I'm using Google Drive, or I'm using other things. But we as an institution are offering something to them. And what about digital humanities? Are we helping them in digital humanities, or again, they are looking to external facilities? And once we have those facilities, are we connected to the external society, the external facilities? So for instance, if we are offering them these new research data repositories, will be those facilities ready to connect to this European Open Science Cloud or other facilities that could be in the future? And moreover, are we offering some services as a top layer to help them, or we just leave the infrastructures there, we give them teras and teras, but we don't help them, for instance, to make the data fair? And have we done an analysis of cost? How much does all these facilities cost? And when we have all this picture in all the different areas, then we can establish goals, okay? And for instance, here I just put a couple of goals from the Amsterdam call for action on open science that were it was a call that was stated in 2016 when the Netherlands was having the presidency of the Commission. Okay, we can say, let's have this full open access in the future. I could say probably not 100, maybe we can reach 90 or 85, would be more realistic for 2020. And also we can establish this goal of, okay, let's try to have our data more reusable. But those goals also have to be accompanied by other actions. And here, there are other actions that I think we have to put in place as soon as possible. The new assessment, the new rewards, the new evaluation systems, and the alignment of policies. It's important to align the different policies because we cannot ask our researchers to do things in a different way that, for instance, Europe or any of the funders are asking to them. We have to do other actions, exploring new ways of evaluation, retain control over research outputs, sharing by default, that's important, to explain why you are going to close, not until now we are explaining why we are opening. Transparency, new negotiations, institutional policies, etc., etc. And that's what we have done at the University of Barcelona. In the last 2 years, we are working on having, with this the new rector and the new team, we have established like, we don't call it yet like a plan, but it's like a draft plan. And we have focused in 4 of the working areas. The easiest one, the open access, because we already have the policy from 2011. A challenge one, the research data management. We already put a group of researchers together in a room like this one, representing our 15 research centers or institutes, and to discuss with them what are your problems, your difficulties on sharing data. The next one that is already on place and we are already having some discussions is how to change evaluation. We don't want to change evaluation radically. we think that it's important to change step by step, but beginning to introduce new concepts. So instead of asking our researchers, where did you publish, maybe to say, which is your best outputs? You can say data sets, or you can say code, doesn't matter. And the public engagement, I think it's also important to, as I mentioned many times before, to bring the society into our university. And we already have very interesting citizen science projects in our institution. So probably what we need is to show them more open. I think what Paul just mentioned in his talk, to have a center or an office of citizen science would help to show those projects that are there, but nobody, not nobody, but just a few people know that they are going on. So we create a steering committee with dedicated working groups. We have a list of actions after we have analyzed what we are, how we are, and which is our current situation. And we are already planning training sessions to all the community. For instance, next week, we will have a training session on open science for PhD students, but we already had some sessions with senior researchers. So currently, we have this institutional open access policy. We link to the CRIS to make the life of researchers easier. We have the funds for open access that we have already excluded hybrid from the beginning, from 2010. We have open access at all the institutional journals, and we have those experiences at the university press. So what we plan to do for the next year? Well, there is already in place the review of institutional policy on open access. Probably what we are planning to do is to link the policy to the evaluation, and it's something that can be done because our economic school has already done and nothing has happened. I mean, there was no revolution or complaining from the researchers. Our technical, the Technical University of Catalonia has already done that from 2015. So the idea is if the paper is not in the repository, this paper will not count in our research assessment, in our internal research assessment, of course. So we can do that. I mean, evaluation outside will be different, but at least doesn't affect if you do that in your institution. They can publish whatever they want, but at least the paper should be in the repository. We also want to review the open access funds for publication. If it's this year we already reviewed, we cut a little bit the amount of money, but we have to figure out if it makes sense that we will pay 2,000, 3,000 euros for a paper, or how much we want to cap that, or we want to expand our budget. It's a discussion that is going on. We also want to continue opening different collections at the university press. I think the researchers are really happy with that, because at the end, researchers, what they want is dissemination. They are not earning a lot of money by selling books. So probably what they want is to get their ideas and their research outputs more open than to just trying to buy a bunch of books. We want also to publish as much information as possible of our publication costs. We already made, we asked a lawyer if it's possible or not. It seems that in Spain we have this law of transparency, that it's not just an option, it's a must. So probably in the future we'll have information about what we are paying at the Spanish level. And we want to already calculate this offsetting and flipping scenarios to say, okay, how much we are publishing, how much it will cost to us to publish openly, etc., etc. And we have other planned actions in other of these areas that I mentioned before. We have already been discussing for the last probably 1 year and a half about establishing a research data management policy. When there is the survey from the LERU, I'm a bit ashamed to say, oh, I'm sorry, we still don't have the policy, and all our colleagues have one. I think it's important to have a policy. It's not like to mandate to share, but at least to establish some principles, some protocols to have the research data more structured, clean, and easier for researchers. We want also to study we are already engaged in analysis of which is the infrastructure we should provide our researchers, not just for work, also to archive and to publish the data. How to sustain infrastructures already have like a list how much it costs the OAJ, how much it costs archive, and it's something that I want to bring to my research, to my rector, and to say we should establish a budget or for these external open infrastructures if we want to follow these open science principles. We want to have this introduction of these new outputs and acknowledge all these citizen science activities that are still difficult to put in the CVs. And as I mentioned, we will be doing a lot of training at all the university levels. So I would just invite you to be as open as possible. And as it was shown in this meeting in the Wheeler room in Berkeley almost 10 years ago, the students were asking universities to be open. And they say, this is the Wheeler Declaration, they say to the universities that if they want to be open, they should make their research open access. They should have all the course materials as open educational resources. They should use, the university should use free software as much as possible. Patents should be for public good. And finally, public internet could not be censored. Thank you very much.
Are there any questions for Ignacy this time? There's one question over there.
We in Serbia is a little bit lucky in the last few months since the Ministry of Science, which finances a majority of the national research, is mandate open access policy. Now I'm talking about open access, not open science. So, and your institution and your university is very interesting for us because at the University of Belgrade, we just established a working group because we have to adopt it institutional policy for the whole university. And also the other university in Serbia is also pushed by the national policy to adopt. The problem is that for the publications funded by the European money or by the government money, it is not the problem. Also, the local publishers, it is also not the problem since they are already open access. Thesis, we have already mandated it and everything is okay. But the problem is in textbooks and in the material which is not funded by the funder which mandate open access. So it will be very interesting for us if you share with us how did you resolve this part of research output.
Yes, I mean, textbooks is very difficult. Even books are difficult because usually books are more closed and the publishers do not allow us to be as open as other outputs. But we are keeping asking. And educational resources, for instance, we did it as a, I could say, as a policy that has not been written at any time. We say to our researchers or to our faculty, if you want to share this educational resource in the repository, you have to choose a CC license. And they do it. Probably they begin to use the most closed license, but we already have the resources there, and they are happy with that. So that's something that you can do. Regarding publications that are not funded, we have a lot. I mean, I showed you the centers, and most of the centers that are more open, they don't have really funded projects. But they already, if you ask them to have a copy in the repository, and you help them with all these copyright issues, they will be happy to do it. What we did, and that's important, is to connect any infrastructure you already have in place. For instance, the CRIS. The CRIS system where they publish where they have all the CVs and we have the institutional data on the research production. They already used to work with that and they do not complain because it's a useful tool that they can have the different layouts of the CVs when they have to apply for one grant or the other one. So they're happy to have that. So there we include as much information as possible about copyright. So at this moment, when any researcher in our institution say, I have published this paper, the journal is already attached with the copyright policy. So they have blue or green. Blue means the author manuscript, green means the published version. And they know that if it's blue, they have to put the author manuscript. And if it's green, they have to put the PDF. And they don't have to bother with anything else. Because we manage all the metadata as a library. We manage all the embargo periods, everything like that. So that's a way. I mean, you don't ask the researchers to spend a lot of time because they will be really reluctant to collaborate with you. But we can talk later if you want and discuss any exchange of information.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Please join me in giving another round of applause to Dr. Labastida. We are progressing well, I think. Questions are coming in through Slido. Thank you for those. Don't forget, you can pose your question or you can vote for existing ones. We also measure the audience, which it has a nice split of teaching staff, about 29%, librarians 29%, and researchers about 19%. And other positions are filling up to 100. So it's a very interesting and good mix of the audience. Thank you for all coming here. Our next presenter is Dr. Yanis Tsakonas from Patras Library, Patras University. Dr. Tsakonas is educated in librarianship and information studies with a PhD in information studies from University in Patras. He has a very interesting practice of research libraries and published libraries, and I'm sure we will all benefit from his presentation today. Is the acting director of the Library of Information Science of University of Patras. Have worked in the frame of a big number of projects concerning the development of digital libraries, while he served as in the program committees and many international conferences. Is a member of the editorial board of International Journal of Digital Libraries and a member of steering committee of the Theory Practice in Digital Libraries Conference. And since 2006, he is a member, he's a member of Liber Board and the Board of Directors of Consortium of Hellenic Academic Libraries. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Tsakonas for his presentation today. And please continue with slide.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm very happy to be here in Belgrade. It's the first time being here. I will speak in my capacity as a member of the Liber Executive Board member, but at the same time I'm acting director in the Library and Information Center of University of Patras in Greece. More or less I understand some of the challenges that you have, some of the questions you have expressed, because you know, Greece is not too far away from you, and I would like also to congratulate you for having established an open science policy. You are taking some very brave steps ahead. In Greece, we haven't done yet, but we recently structured a working team to work on that, and we are very happy that the minister understood how crucial are libraries in this effort, and we have representatives in this working group. So I will try to be a little bit philosophical and very much practical, so it's going to be to the extremes. A new kind of dialogue, open science as a discourse topic between libraries, researchers, and societies. When I started dealing with this topic of open science, I thought that this very much resembles to a dialogue. This means that, at least in my view, science right now is turning into a monologue. We have researchers publishing all the time And as Paul Oris said before, many of those papers are not even read, or we don't have any indication that they have been read, like receiving citations. So we don't know what is the merit in this. So we need science to be more interactive, and it needs to be done more interactive between researchers, scientists, between libraries and scientists. For many years, libraries were not very good at communicating with researchers. They were not hearing what the researchers needed exactly. I think that gradually we are correcting that. And of course, between societies, science has to discuss also with society. Now, also Ignacy said that we don't have any firm definition of what open science is. We don't have something that says open science is exactly this. We know what open science does, but we don't know it exactly. It's a set of practices, but still we're not very sure about that. We have an understanding what is about, but because it's a very dynamic field, we have instances of open science that we discuss on. So I will try to answer this question, why we make a dialogue. And because I'm Greek, I read Plato. And in the secondary education in Greece, we learn ancient Greek, but we learn ancient Greek as, you know, the language of our ancestors. Sometimes when you focus on the language, you don't pay attention to the meanings. So this summer, all by coincidence, I took some of the scripts of my ancestors, and I was trying to read in order to understand more about them, their meanings. So Plato has authored one of his latest works is Sophist. If you are not familiar with the word, is someone who's very fluent speaker, someone who has some certain degree of knowledge on something, but he claims that he knows everything. And because he's very fluent, he tends to distort the truth with some tricks. So Plato, who was seeking for the true essence of things, he's trying to understand what kind of person is this sophist. So it's a part of a triple of dialogues: sophist, statesman, and the philosopher. The philosopher was never found, was never authored probably, but it's a very much anticipated work for everybody. The statesman is a very important work in the Plato's life, but the sophist was underestimated. And Plato is using this dialectic process. So he makes a dialogue between two persons there, and through questioning and answering, he tries to find the true essence of things. And because all the works of Plato, they explore certain things, this one explores the being and the not being. So it's very, very philosophical. We will not go there. Very hard documents, manuscripts to read, okay? Very dense and very challenging for every reader. But the Platonic dialogue requires the absence of contradiction. Everything must be clear and should have one true meaning, okay? So should not be ambiguous. So Plato asks this: is it now clear that he is a kind of a juggler, okay? An imitator of realities, okay? The sophist is someone who imitates the reality. And pretty much we have this kind of science here, these areas, these times, where people imitate things. We have retraction notes from journals. Papers are being withdrawn because of bad practices. Some people say that they did a study, but they didn't. They never did. That's why we need open data in order to be able to iterate some of their work and prove that actually it has been done. And whether he may not truly possesses the knowledge of all the things about which he seems to be able to argue. If you are active on social media, you will face that all the time, okay? Everybody has an opinion, most probably not well documented, okay? But we insist on this opinion, and therefore we shape our societies, we shape our science, we shape our economy, we shape several things because we think we know, but we do not know. This is philosophy. Let's go to real life. As I said, I'm representing a very big network of research libraries, which is LIBER, the Association of European Research Libraries. We have 440 members, and we have one mission. We are devoted to open science. Our policies, tools, and infrastructures, we think, that are shaping research process and mindsets in favor of open. Okay, everything that our members do is doing to this direction. And we have one mission, of course. We don't have the mission to be the best library network, no. We have the mission to enable our researchers to do the best kind of research and to contribute to the growth and sharing of knowledge. 1 year ago, we inaugurated our strategy for the years to 2018-2022, and we set up a scheme that supports that. We have 3 steering committees on 3 large directions, and every steering committee has 3 working groups. So in total, we have 9 working groups that cover many of the most important parts of the landscape. For instance, we have copyright, we have open access, we have innovative metrics, we have research data infrastructures, digital skills, and digital humanities, and many other. So libraries powering sustainable knowledge in the digital age means that we need to create all these conditions in order knowledge in these very, very uncertain times in terms of society, in terms of economy, in terms of technology, is sustainable and can stay as long as it is needed. Now, the vision is that open access at the end of this period is the main form of publishing. Open access is a very, very important topic. Research data is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. Digital skills underpin a more open and transparent research lifecycle. Research infrastructures are participatory, tailored, and scaled to the needs of the diverse disciplines. And tomorrow's cultural heritage is built on today's digital information. So what we produce right now, it's part of our cultures, it's part of our societies, so we need to save it now, not afterwards, because the layers that we are saving are not as persistent as we used to have. Paper, stone, and so on. So we have to save it now, not 20 years after. And when we started drafting the strategy, we understood that libraries have to cover every step of the research life cycle. And we are here as libraries, as librarians, in order to assist our researchers to plan, to support them to have access to information, to manage those kind of information assets, to publish somewhere that is good, and to be able to assess what they have published, and to be able, of course, to reuse, okay, in order to keep more water inside the stream. The strategy is one thing, and then we had to make it more concrete. It's a high-level document as a strategy document, but we need to be more practical. So we issued this open science roadmap, which is not far away from what Paul previously presented. You can find the link there, but I'm very glad that this is also a part of a dialogue. Okay, it was not written by just some experts. We gathered a couple of colleagues around the table, but we took this document and we took also the strategy to our members, and we discussed that, and we made some amends, and we try to make it more relevant to everybody. It is important, again, to say here that the roadmap and other policy documents that LIBER has produced the last couple of years are taking into account that we have libraries working on different levels. We understand that there are different conditions in the UK, different conditions in Scandinavia, different conditions in the Balkans, different conditions in Spain, different conditions in Central Europe, in the Baltics, and there is no single solution that can serve everybody. So we are making recommendations, and I will show you a couple of our recommendations, but these recommendations are flexible enough so that everybody can adjust to it. Of course, when somebody recommends, I think this is a personal opinion, when I try to implement things in Greece and in Patras, should not be guilty, okay? We are not guilty because we cannot implement everything, okay? So let's leave our guilt outside and concentrate on the actual work. Paul said that those are pillars. I'm saying that these are topics, but these 7 topics are what we discuss in this open science roadmap: scholarly publishing, fair data, research infrastructure and AEOS, metrics and rewards, open science skills, research integrity, and citizen science. This document, again, was not produced in a vacuum, okay? It was produced because we know that the landscape is changing. We monitor things. We try to shape together things. And I will show you that these are the LIBER topics, these are the LERU pillars, and these are the OSPP, Open Science Policy Platform topics that more or less we are guided by. Okay, so we are trying to be relevant to the entire process. We are trying to be very, very close, and there is no way to reinvent another wheel that might not lead somewhere. We just see what other associations are doing, and we are trying to adjust that to the particular roles of the libraries. So I will give you a couple of examples of what our libraries can do, and in this roadmap. But of course, because our audience is mixed, if you are a researcher, you may have some ideas what you can ask from your library. That's why I said this is a dialogue. Okay, so if you find something that it's missing from your library, you go there and ask, can we implement this? Can we start developing this? If you are a librarian and you think that this is good, yes, find your researchers and ask them if this is useful to them. So scholarly publishing, as previous speakers told, ensure that there is an open science policy or an open access mandate in your institution. This is very, very, it's elementary. Champion open science by embracing a new role as the direct publisher of information. UCL is one of these examples. Stockholm University Press is a second example. And we are talking about university presses guided, directed by the libraries. And of course, they are dealing with this very, very difficult material that's called textbook or monograph. Commit to following our licensing practices for open access. We have 5 principles that you can follow when you are negotiating with the publishers. For instance, in Greece, we are discussing, our consortium is discussing the renewal of the big deals with all the big publishers, and we're trying to implement those things that we learned from the open access working group and the principles, and examine new models for journal delivery, such as mega journals, as a format of popular among research funders. From this set of recommendations, I think the first one is very, very important because it says that invest in staff, invest in people, invest in skills. With good data skills and trained personnel to promote fair principles, work to make the use of fair compliant output and data management plans. Certify your repositories. If you have a repository, there are certain certifications that you can check against. You can acquire. For instance, we have a very, very small 5 minutes on. Oh, okay. That's the bad thing when you are a Greek and you discuss about philosophy, and you understand that we did that without wine. Okay. We did that without wine. Automating metadata protection and so on. Advocate for copyright legislation which supports fair data. This is very, very important. Occasionally, Liber calls for some support during the copyright reform. As a director and member of the board of directors of the consortium, I had to write down a letter to the minister and say, look, those articles are very, very important. Liber provides this guidance. Okay, we are not people of, we are not lawyers. So we have this expertise in Liber, and this can be accelerated among our network. So research infrastructure and the EOSC, the European Open Science Cloud, is very important for the forthcoming weeks. And 2 weeks ago, we were in Vienna, and we showcased how libraries can help the implementation, the development of European Open Science Cloud. Metrics and rewards, very, very important things, because if we want the things to change, we need to change the reward system. Open science skills, again, very important. Liber is doing a lot of work on developing the skills of our members. We have 2 programs for senior or senior administrative staff. And of course, we have a new working group that works on this area. Research integrity, participate in establishing codes of conduct. Some of these things are not present in universities. Some of these things need to be written down from the scratch, and it's Actually, I will speak for my university and for my country in general. It's the same that the Greek state has not taken any action on this so many years ago. Citizen science promote the library as an active partner in citizen science and use the library as an organizing and managing body to ensure that responsible conduct and good scholarly practice are respected when participating. I mean, the library can be a stop where people who want to practice citizen science can go there. Now, text and data mining means that I am able to go there and mine information from the text. If you don't have open licenses, then you cannot do something like that. Of course, this is an exercise that I did with my colleague, Moses Boutourides, who is a professor of mathematics. This is a network of terms that we mined from the open science roadmap. So we said, okay, we written something. Let's see if this something reflects something else. So these are the key agents, researchers, funders, libraries, publishers, authors, and then there are topics mentioned in open science roadmap. You can see that this graph, this network graph, is very interconnected. How big is the bubble means that this term is mentioned most times within our document, and then the connections is how important, how well connected is open science and libraries, and we did that by measuring, calculating how many times each word was co-occurred in a sentence in this document. And I have done that also for Leroux and OSPP, and you can see differences that everybody pays attention to other things. Now, cultural change, we said, what you can do is to use training and advocacy to foster a common understanding. It was said before, we need to understand the same thing, otherwise it will not work. Okay, this is a minimum requirement for any kind of dialogue, that we speak, first of all, the same language, not language like Greek or Serbian, but we say open science and we mean the same thing, that we say open access and we mean the same thing. Ensure that your institution has an open science policy, reflect your commitment to open science across all services. There is an institution in Greece that says we are doing everything open. We released a new version of our system called Open Something. I will not. And when I tried to find the code, I was not able. Okay, so you practice what you preach. And share inspiring examples. If you have an inspiring example, then share it with others. Don't be afraid that you get copied. If you get copied, it means that you did something good. Okay. Now, why make a dialogue? Because we talked about, and this is the last few slides. I will make a revisit. I will not go back to Plato, not Socrates, not Aristotle, no. I will go to Robert Oppenheimer, who said, this open access to knowledge, these unlocked doors and signs of welcome are a mark of a freedom as fundamental as any. They give a freedom to resolve difference by converse. And where converse does not unite, to let tolerance compose diversity. This is something that is missing from this world that we are living. Okay, we do not have tolerance. We do not have an understanding of how the others work. Open science is something that needs many people to work. Collaboration is a key element, so we need to be working together with other people. Otherwise, it will not work. We have to be tolerant, and sometimes we have to be tolerant for the ignorance that some colleagues have. Okay, so we have to help the others, and this is very important if you have open science to move together for a better future. So thank you very much.
Are there any questions now for Dr. Tsakonas? I hope you found the presentation very inspiring, as I personally found it. Thank you very much for this. We are preparing to break for lunch now, before our last session of today. Thank you very much for all being here, and I hope you will enjoy a well-deserved rest and fill your battery for the last session. During the break, we will change the Slido from questions to a second poll, the last poll, which will measure the audience in terms of your participation in different institutions. So while maybe have this break, maybe you can also vote and say from what kind of institutions, not names, but what kind of institutions you are coming from. Thank you very much for this, and we'll see each other in about 40 minutes. Or 50 minutes, sorry, 50 minutes. It was a wishful thinking.